In the autumn of 1871, a city burned. Chicago, barely 40 years old, barely a city by the standards of the ancient world, collapsed into cinder and ash over the course of 2 nights. And when the smoke cleared, surveyors moved in to measure what remained. What they found at the lakefront was not what they expected. 40 feet below the new grade line, beneath layers of fire debris and collapsed timber framing, their instruments encountered something that resisted easy explanation. Cut stone foundation walls, massive in their proportions, oriented not to the city's existing street grid, but to a water channel that appeared on no official city plan, no land patent, no colonial survey on record anywhere in the Chicago Municipal Archive. The cuts were precise, the stone was load-bearing, the orientation was deliberate, and the structures were, by any reasonable engineering estimate, too large and too sophisticated to have been built by the modest frontier settlement that Chicago had been only 4 decades earlier. The surveyors logged the anomaly. The reconstruction moved forward. The landfill went down. And 40 feet of new Chicago settled over the question like a lid closing over a sealed room, leaving no visible seam, no marker, no indication to anyone walking above that anything unusual had ever been found beneath. Something about this doesn't add up. It never did. And the more carefully you examine the record, not the popular record, not the textbook summary, but the actual administrative paper trail, the engineering logs, the Port Authority correspondence, the colonial transfer documents, the more the anomaly in Chicago begins to look less like an isolated curiosity and more like one data point in a pattern that stretches across every ocean-facing coastline on Earth. To understand why this disappeared, you have to go back to the coastlines of the 18th century and a harbor system that was functioning long before the cities built above it were ever imagined. The system did not announce itself. It left no founding charter, no construction ledger, no architect's signature carved into a cornerstone. What it left were the stones themselves and the records of the people who came after it, who found the stones already in place and simply began using them, maintaining them, and eventually claiming them as their own. Between roughly 1,700 and 1,830 across coastal cities on at least 3 continents, a pattern appears in the administrative record that colonial-era port authorities were apparently content to leave unexplained. Repair costs logged against harbor infrastructure, for which no original construction cost exists. In Boston, Port Commission records from the early 18th century authorize expenditures for the maintenance of stone basin walls whose construction date is listed as unknown. In Liverpool, Harbor Board documents from the same period reference the reinforcement of quay foundations described in one administrative note as pre-existing the city's formal incorporation. In New Orleans, French colonial administrators writing back to Paris between 1718 and 1730 describe improving the waterways at the mouth of the Mississippi, not constructing them. Improving them, a linguistic choice so quiet it nearly disappears into the bureaucratic texture of the correspondence. In Odessa, on the Black Sea coast, harbor records from the early 19th century describe operational port infrastructure inherited from a prior administrative arrangement that no subsequent document names. The pattern is consistent enough to be unsettling. These were not small structures, quietly absorbed into the colonial fabric. They were functional, load-bearing, deep-draft-capable harbor systems, stone basins wide enough, according to fragments of engineering notation scattered across several archives, to accommodate vessels of a class that would not officially exist in these ports for another generation. Cartographer Jean-Baptiste Bourguignon d'Anville, working in Paris between the 1722nd and the 1772nd, produced maps of the Atlantic and Pacific coastlines that contained small but persistent notations, harbor depth indicators, channel markers, anchorage designations at locations where no European colonial construction project had yet been authorized. D'Anville was meticulous. He did not invent features. He documented what information reached him, and the information reaching him described functioning coastal infrastructure at locations that, by official record, should have been undeveloped shoreline. No institution has ever explained where his source data originated, and no subsequent cartographic authority has formally addressed the discrepancy between his notations and the official construction timeline of the ports they describe. This is the first thing you need to understand about what may have been erased. It was not primitive. That is the central irony. The thing that makes this more than an archaeological curiosity and transforms it into something that deserves the word suppression. The harbor system that appears, ghost-like, beneath the foundation records of a dozen coastal cities was not a rough precursor to the sophisticated infrastructure that replaced it. By every measurable indicator available in the surviving documentation, basin dimensions, channel orientation, load-bearing capacity, tidal gate design, it was, in several respects, more logistically coherent than what was built above it. It did not require the institutions that came after it. It did not require a railroad concession, a canal authority, a federal harbor appropriation, or a port commission with the power to levy tolls. It simply existed, and it worked, and whatever civilization built it had organized continental-scale maritime logistics without leaving a name in the official record of any empire that came after. The Encyclopedia Britannica, first edition, published in 1771, contains an entry for Tartary that describes it as the largest empire on the surface of the earth, stretching from the borders of Muscovy and Siberia to the Pacific coast, with documented access to the Caspian Sea, the Baltic approaches, and trade routes reaching the eastern Mediterranean. Hermann Moll, the cartographer who died in 1732, had labeled contiguous Tartarian territories across maps of Asia and the northern Pacific with the confidence of a man describing a political reality, not a geographical hypothesis. Tartaria Magna, Chinese Tartary, independent Tartary. These were not marginal annotations. They occupied the center of the map. And then, between 1771 and 1820, without a documented war of dissolution, without a peace treaty, without a ruin date recorded in any chronicle anywhere in the world, Tartaria disappeared from every subsequent atlas, every revised encyclopedia, every redrawn administrative map. By 1820, the word was gone. The territory had been absorbed into the expanding borders of the Russian Empire, the Qing dynasty, and the nascent administrative frameworks of Central Asian governance, absorbed so completely that no successor state acknowledged inheriting anything from it. No successor harbor authority claimed to have built what it was clearly maintaining. The disappearance was not violent, or at least it left no violence in the record. It was administrative. And administrative disappearances are, in many ways, more permanent than military ones because they do not leave ruins. And ruins are what archaeologists follow. The harbor infrastructure that appears beneath the record of so many coastal cities may be the most tangible evidence of what Tartaria actually was, not a cartographic label applied to a plate, vague territorial mass, but a functioning civilization with the engineering capacity to build, standardize, and maintain maritime infrastructure across thousands of miles of coastline. A civilization with access to the Pacific, the Caspian, the Baltic, and Atlantic adjacent trade routes does not maintain those routes with informal arrangements. It builds, it standardizes, it engineers to a specification, and here is where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Across the 1,840 seconds, 1,850 seconds, and 1,860 seconds, as American and European port authorities undertook what they described as the construction of modern harbor infrastructure in Baltimore, Hamburg, Marseille, and the newly claimed port of Vladivostok, engineers working on these projects encountered, and in several documented cases, simply built upon stone basin foundations whose dimensions recurred with a consistency that has no official explanation. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, conducting coastal surveys in 1866, produced reports that describe existing waterfront structures in language carefully chosen to avoid the question of origin. The Hamburg Hafenbaubehörde, the city's harbor construction authority, filed foundational records for the expanded port facilities that reference prior stone courses integrated into the new construction without attributing those prior courses to any known builder, the same measurement. different cities, different continents. No shared engineering tradition documented between them. No common standard-setting body that anyone has identified. No International Harbor Congress that issued a unified specification before 1850. Something issued the original dimensions. No institution has ever said what it was, and no academic body has formally proposed an answer. What Napoleonic France and Romanov Russia knew about this is buried in the gap between their administrative language and their construction budgets. Between 1803 and 1815, as Napoleon reorganized the port cities of Western Europe and Alexander I extended Russian imperial coastal surveys across the northern Pacific, both empires produced administrative transfer documents that used a phrase in French, infrastructure hérité, in Russian, the equivalent of inherited imperial works, to categorize harbor systems that passed into their administrative control without a prior owner of record. Jean-Baptiste de Menou, who administered French colonial territories and later European port reorganizations under Napoleon, signed transfer documents for harbor facilities, described as pre-existing the French administrative presence by an unspecified period. Count Nikolai Rumyantsev, Russian imperial chancellor and architect of early 19th century port policy under Alexander I, oversaw coastal surveys that documented operational harbor infrastructure along the Pacific coast of Siberia, infrastructure that, according to the survey language, was already in place when Russian imperial administration arrived. Neither man published an explanation. Neither administration commissioned an archaeological inquiry into the origin of what they were inheriting. The transfer documents were filed. The harbors were absorbed. The prior ownership was not named. This was not ignorance. That is the second thing you need to understand, and it is darker than the first. The French and Russian imperial bureaucracies did not fail to notice the anomaly of inherited infrastructure with no builder on record. They noticed it, categorized it, absorbed it, and filed the prior civilization's physical legacy under their own institutional name. The suppression was not an accident of history. It was a deliberate archival decision made by named administrators, preserved in documents that still exist in French and Russian state archives, and it left traces precisely because bureaucracies cannot erase everything they touch. The inheritance language survived. It just stopped being read by anyone with the authority to ask what it meant. By the 1880 seconds, the anomaly had begun quietly to surface in public consciousness and was quietly returned to obscurity each time it did. In 1893, as Frederick Law Olmsted oversaw the landscape preparation for the Chicago World's Fair at Jackson Park, a site chosen for its proximity to the lakefront and its apparent availability as open ground construction crews breaking ground for the fairground foundations, encountered stone drainage channels running through what official geological surveys had classified as swamp substrate. Swamp geology does not produce cut stone drainage channels. The channels were too regular, too deliberately oriented, and too structurally sound to be natural formations. They were logged in the Jackson Park excavation records and immediately reclassified under a category called site remediation, a bureaucratic designation that placed them outside the scope of archaeological inquiry and inside the scope of engineering disposal. The records exist in the Chicago Park District archives. The reclassification happened within weeks of the discovery. No independent assessment was commissioned. Olmsted's published correspondence from the period does not mention them. The paperwork made them disappear faster than any demolition crew could have managed, because paperwork, unlike demolition, leaves no visible scar on the landscape above. But consider what this reclassification protected. The economic logic of the era depended entirely on the harbor system not existing. Cornelius Vanderbilt had built a transportation empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars on the principle that the movement of goods required institutional mediation, a railroad, a fee, a concession, a published rate schedule filed with a federal commission. Ferdinand de Lesseps had spent a decade and an enormous quantity of capital constructing the Suez Canal between 1859 and 1869 on the premise that no functional passage between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea existed. Outside human institutional creation, a harbor network that was ownerless, unregulated, and already built was not merely inconvenient to this logic, it was existentially threatening to it. You do not need a canal concession if the canal is already there. You need it to disappear. Congressional debates on harbor improvement appropriations throughout the 1840 and 1850 use language that describes the construction of waterfront infrastructure in cities where period photographs that predate the supposed construction show stone walls already standing, quay foundations already in place, basin edges already dressed and functional. The language says building. The photographs show built. That gap has never been officially explained, and no federal body has been asked to explain it. The fire made the gap permanent. In October 1871, Chicago burned. In the same week, the Peshtigo fire consumed over 1 million acres of Wisconsin timber. The Great Michigan Fire swept the eastern shore of Lake Michigan simultaneously. In 1872, Boston's commercial district burned. In 1875, Virginia City went. The clustering of major urban fires across a 4-year window has been noted by several independent researchers and dismissed by mainstream scholarship as coincidence, a product of dry conditions, wooden construction density, and the absence of modern firefighting capacity. That explanation may be entirely correct. But in Chicago, what followed the fire matters more than the fire itself. Mayor Joseph Medill, who took office in the immediate aftermath and oversaw the city's comprehensive reconstruction, authorized a regrading of the lakefront that lowered the effective grade line by several feet and covered the waterfront stratum with a continuous layer of compacted landfill, extending the full length of the rebuilt harbor district. The Chicago City Council Reconstruction Ordinances of 1872 cross-referenced with U.S. Lake Survey records produced by the Army Corps of Engineers in 1873 document this grade change in engineering language focused entirely on drainage improvement and flood prevention capacity. What the language does not address is the effect of the grade change on the anomalous foundation stratum that surveyors had encountered the previous year, the stratum that now lay permanently sealed beneath the new fill. Inaccessible, without the kind of excavation that no subsequent city administration ever authorized. In 2 years, the fire and the survey had accomplished what no single institution could have ordered openly and survived public scrutiny. The physical evidence was sealed. The question it posed went underground. And above it, the new Chicago rose. The institutional machinery that formalized this burial was assembled in the decades that followed. General Andrew A. Humphreys, who served as Chief of the Army Corps of Engineers from 1866 to 1879, oversaw the expansion of federal harbor authority across the American coastline during a period when the Corps' annual reports began using language that would prove administratively decisive. Pre-existing waterfront structures, where they appeared in survey data, were reclassified as natural formations or, alternatively, as colonial-era earthworks, a category that placed them outside the scope of investigative mandate and inside the scope of routine engineering management. The same structures described in 1850 survey reports as existing infrastructure appeared in 1880 Corps documents as natural rock outcroppings or unattributed earthen berms requiring only maintenance. In Britain, the Harbors Clauses Acts of 1847 and 1877 established standardized legal definitions of harbor infrastructure that effectively rendered pre-institutional structures invisible to the administrative record if a harbor feature could not be attributed to a recognized builder. Under the Act's framework, it was classified as a natural coastal feature, maintained at public expense, origin unasked, and legally irrelevant. The same stones became natural rock formations in a single bureaucratic revision. No geologist was formally consulted. No archaeologist was commissioned to assess the reclassification. The change was administrative, and in the 19th century, administrative decisions about harbor infrastructure were not subject to independent archaeological review. They simply stood. Daniel Burnham understood the ground he was working on. His 1909 Plan of Chicago, a document that reshaped the American city planning tradition and remains one of the most studied urban design blueprints in architectural history, called explicitly for the clearing and reconstruction of the lakefront, including harbor areas where, 30 years earlier, anomalous substructures had appeared in survey records, subsequently reclassified and filed away. The plan's demolition zones align, with uncomfortable precision, over the sites where the pre-grid foundations had been documented. No archaeological survey was ordered before demolition began. No subgrade investigation was commissioned before the new construction proceeded. Baron Haussmann had set the precedent in Paris 40 years earlier. Between 1853 and 1870, his reconstruction of the French capital demolished pre-existing Senkai structures that had stood for centuries, replacing them with the uniform dressed stone embankments that define the Parisian waterfront today. Haussmann's three-volume memoirs, published between 1890 and 1893, describe the reconstruction in the language of aesthetic improvement and sanitary modernization. They do not describe what was removed, what lay beneath, or what origin those removed structures may have carried. They called it progress. The blueprint shows they knew exactly what was underneath. And in Odessa, a city that, unlike Chicago and Paris, did not undergo intensive Western-style modernization until the Soviet era, something slipped through the administrative net. In 1934, Soviet engineers conducting a harbor expansion survey documented pre-existing basin structures in the Odessa port that their own report described as inconsistent with known Greek colonial construction methods and inconsistent with Ottoman administrative building records from the centuries of Ottoman control. The structures were measurable. The inconsistency was noted in the report's own technical language. The Soviet engineering report then classified the structures as Greco-Roman ruins, a label that placed them within the comfortable and closed frame of classical Mediterranean archaeology and ended the inquiry before it could become a formal research program. The label was not supported by the structural evidence the report itself contained. It was, the pattern strongly suggests, a convenience, a way of naming something unfamiliar so that the name itself foreclosed further questioning, but something persisted. In New Orleans, French colonial port records held at the Archives nationales d'Outre-mer in Aix-en-Provence describe, in correspondence dated between 1718 and 1730, the improvement of waterway infrastructure at the mouth of the Mississippi River. The city of New Orleans was formally founded in 1718. The infrastructure being improved in those earliest administrative letters was already present at the moment of founding. The French did not build the harbor at New Orleans. They found it, and their own administrative correspondence, preserved in a French archive thousands of miles from Louisiana, carries the linguistic trace of that fact in a single carefully chosen verb, ameliorer. To improve, not construe wire, to build. In Lisbon, harbor retaining walls in the Alfama district contain stone courses that municipal archaeological surveys have noted are inconsistent with known Moorish construction methods and inconsistent with Roman imperial engineering profiles from the periods of documented Roman presence in the Iberian Peninsula. The walls are there. They are load-bearing, integrated into the active harbor structure, and old in ways that the standard architectural chronology of Lisbon does not fully account for. No tradition that officially touched this coastline has claimed them. These survivals share a single quality. They persisted not because anyone deliberately protected them, but because they were too structurally integrated into the cities built above them to be safely demolished without compromising the infrastructure that depended on them. They are the erased thing's refusal to completely disappear, and no official body has produced an explanation that accounts for their presence. After 1945, the silence became structural rather than merely habitual. Jacqueline Tyrwhitt, the British urban planner who coordinated UNESCO's post-war reconstruction programs across Europe and the Middle East through the late 1940s and 1950s, helped design the frameworks under which bombed and destroyed coastal cities. Naples, Beirut, Rotterdam, and others were rebuilt from near total devastation. The UNESCO Urban Reconstruction Program reports from this period are notable for a consistent absence. Subgrade archaeological investigation protocols for harbor sites do not appear in the planning frameworks for any of the cities covered. Rotterdam's harbor was rebuilt from near total wartime destruction with extraordinary speed and administrative efficiency. No systematic investigation of what lay beneath the pre-war harbor grade was conducted before reconstruction began. Naples rebuilt its waterfront without a mandated archaeological survey of the pre-modern strata. Beirut's harbor district was reconstructed, damaged again in subsequent decades, reconstructed again, and at no point in the documented planning record was a subgrade harbor survey included as a required step before construction proceeded. The omission is consistent across cities that share no common architect, no common national funding body, no common engineering tradition beyond the UNESCO coordination framework that guided their rebuilding. A consistent omission across geographically unconnected cities, enforced across multiple decades and multiple planning generations, is not an oversight produced by resource scarcity or post-war urgency. It is, the pattern suggests, a policy. Every city was rebuilt, and not one of them did anyone look down. Stand at the edge of any coastal city today. Chicago's lakefront, where the compacted landfill of 1,872 lies directly beneath the pedestrian path that millions of people walk every year. The New Orleans riverfront, where the French Quarter's oldest edge meets water that French administrators described improving before their city officially existed. The Alfama seawall in Lisbon, where stone courses of uncertain age and unattributed origin hold back a harbor that has been in continuous active use for longer than any single civilization currently claims credit for. The surface is familiar. The surface belongs to us, to the cities we recognize, the institutions we know, the histories we were given. 40 feet down, or 20, or 10? The depth varies by city. By the weight and volume of what was built and filled and paved above the stones are still there. Cut to specification, oriented to water channels, load-bearing, dressed for deep draft vessels, arranged according to a logic that the cities above them did not produce and have never formally explained. The harbor system that appears again and again beneath the administrative foundations of the modern coastal world implies something that no mainstream historical institution has been willing to formally propose. A pre-modern civilization with continental-scale logistical reach, a civilization that engineered not for a single coastline, but for an interconnected planetary system of coasts. A civilization whose physical legacy became so thoroughly integrated into the infrastructure of the world that succeeded it, that erasing the origin required not one dramatic act of destruction, but a century and a half of quiet, consistent, professionally executed administrative reclassification grade changes, archival absorptions, remediation filings, natural formation designations, Greco-Roman ruin labels, and post-war reconstruction protocols that prioritize surface speed over subsurface truth. The harbors did not disappear because they stopped working. They disappeared because the order that came after them needed to be understood as the first order needed the story of the world's waterfront infrastructure to begin with itself, with its own concessions and appropriations and improvement acts and canal commissions, and so it rewrote the beginning, quietly, everywhere, simultaneously, in the administrative language of 100 port authorities and reconstruction committees that never needed to coordinate, because the logic of institutional self-preservation is the same in every language and every century. The stones remain beneath the cities. The question they pose has not been answered by any institution with the authority and the access to properly ask it. And somewhere beneath the next coastal city that breaks ground for a new foundation, somewhere in the stratum that no planning document requires anyone to examine a surveyor's instrument, will encounter a cut stone edge that, belongs to no known construction era, and the report will be filed under the nearest available administrative category, and the concrete will go down, and the city will rise another increment above the thing it cannot explain, and has decided, across generations and governments and oceans, not to look at directly.